when new anglers get into this sport, the first thing that people tell them is you get a round reel and you put braid on it all the way to the rim. Don't. Just don't. I've seen this ruin rookies' experiences over and over. If you're one of the people that recommends this to beginning fishermen, you should be ashamed of yourself. Seriously. Just stop. Get them a reel that's easy to work. Have them spool it up with mono. And send them out fishing with some ideas where they'll actually end up with some fish. So that we actually have some fishermen in the future, please. This is the coach. We're just going over some basics. Monofilament here. We got some Andy 60 pound. We got some Seaguar 40 pound fluoro. And we got some Max Quattro 50 pound here. A lot of beginning anglers, and I am talking to the beginning anglers. I'm not talking to the old hands that are been throwing pencil poppers to stripers for 20 years. I'm not really talking to you guys. Fluoro. Years ago, I experimented with fluoro, and I found out that for the type of fishing I do, and even offshore fishing, I did a lot of offshore fishing, I have not noticed an appreciable increase in catch rate from using fluoro. I haven't. Now, in my mind, fluoro excels for a few applications, and we'll talk about that too. But monofilament, our old friend, been around a long time. It's hard stuff, it's abrasion resistant, it's easy to tie. It doesn't tend to fail. And possibly the most important, it's easy to untangle if it gets snagged or you have an overrun on your reel or a backlash or it gets under the spool of your reel, whereas braid can slip into your bearings. Fluoro can be really difficult to tie for the novice angler. If they're not really confident with their knots, fluoro is a bad thing because it does not cinch down as easily as mono. We'll talk about it. So if you're a beginning angler, use mono. Pick a reel that'll fit the right amount of mono for what you need it for. Kind of, in my mind, the jack of all trades is I'd say 35 size Okuma or 4,000 size Cascade Piscifun, Penn Battle, The 4,000 size reel with 12 pound test monofilament is kind of a jack of all trades. You can catch anything from saltwater panfish to freshwater catfish up to 25 pounds, no problem on 12 pound mono if you just take your time. Monofilament is forgiving. It's easy to tie. If you're practicing your knots, which is what I tell everybody to do, if you're sitting in front of the TV and you're an aspiring fisherman or a novice fisherman, practice your knots. You can sit there and watch YouTube. You can tie the surgeon's loop over and over till you get it right. And when you cut this off, it's not like braid or fluorocarbon. It's very cheap. You can buy a practice spool at your local big box store for just a couple bucks. Now, the cost of mono is one of its greatest advantages. And the reason for this is really simple. When I spool up one of my 4,000 size reels, I can spool it up with decent grade monofilament for about 25 cents. So when I go fishing, I don't have a single excuse not to have a fresh, full spool of monofilament on there without any hesitation. If it costs me a couple of bucks each time to go fishing, what is a quarter on a fresh spool of monofilament, even if you do it every single time? People talk about the cost savings of braid. A couple hundred yards of braid will cost you about 12 bucks at your local big box store. Maybe a little more depending on what brand you buy. For that same $12, at a quarter a spool, or 40 cents a spool, if you buy pretty nice monofilament, how many spools is that? Well, sounds like it's about 36 spools or so at a quarter each. So you can get 36 full spools of monofilament for the same price as one spool of Power Pro, for example. So you can change your line much more often, which I encourage all new anglers to do. Learn how to put line on your reel, which we'll be showing you here a little later on. And at the same time, replace your line as often as you can. I mean, I replace the line on my reels once a week. It costs $1 or something. The ones I use all the time. And it's very cheap. It's very reasonable insurance against any set of scenarios that you can come up with, from getting better casting distance to landing big fish. Because if you have fresh line, you are absolutely ahead of the curve. Now, that's not to say that there aren't scenarios I use braid in. There's a reason I own this spool. And in my mind, where braid really excels is when you're throwing the same thing over and over, like in freshwater bass fishing. Or if you're going to go and throw the pencil popper for 3 days straight down on the Long Island shoreline. If you're doing the same thing over and over again, braid is great. It holds up pretty good it holds up a little better than mono over time. It's a lot more expensive to replace. So I've seen a lot of guys fish braid long past its potential service life. And I'm not saying that the braid itself is worn out, but let's say there's a nick 30 feet up the line. Instead of cutting it off and putting a fresh spool of line on, they just keep fishing it like that because they realize it'll cost them 10, 12 bucks to put a new spool of line on. As I say, cost is one of monofilament's greatest advantages. The fact that you can spool a 4,000 size reel for less than 50 cents without any trouble at all, and you can do it over and over and over again at almost no long-term cost, really, in terms of your overall fishing, is one of monofilament's greatest attributes. All right, so fluoro. Where fluoro really excels in its extremely rapid sink rate. When I hear offshore guys who are fishing for tuna or other large pelagics, when I hear them talking about the need for fluoro, I have this nagging suspicion that what they're really talking about the need for is something that will point your bait down without any extra weight. So the sink rate of fluoro is where I feel that it really excels. When you're using live baits in current and you need them to face down into the current so they can get bit. When I hear the offshore guys and around San Diego, I've heard them what seems like a million times how you need fluoro to catch big tuna. I don't think they're talking about visibility. I think they're talking about the density of the line carrying their bait to where it needs to be to get bit. So in terms of fluoro, all the bass guys use it. Of course, all the bass guys are sponsored. So they want to sell you a product that costs you an arm and a leg whenever possible. I think that that's the main reason that fluoro is so often used during bass fishing, although I could see it as an advantage, particularly for the tournament guys who have a lot of money on the line. But I could see it as an advantage for fly line plastics or Texas rig plastics without any weight, or other situations where you want as natural a presentation as possible, as deep as you can get it. In those scenarios, fluorocarbon makes sense. On the other hand, fluorocarbon doesn't make sense because of its knot strength and its overall cost. So you have to weigh the cost over the chance of getting that bait in front of one more fish. Anyway, these are my thoughts about mono, braid, and fluoro. Mono is by far the most versatile. It's by far the cheapest. It's the most available. It comes in the most options. You can get really limp monofilament. You can get really stiff monofilament. I have come to find in my old age that memory is not necessarily a bad thing in monofilament. Being able to, you can manually straighten monofilament too. You can make a straight section out of it if you want to. I would rather have fresh monofilament than year-old braid on a reel any day. Even if it is 50 pound or something, that 12 or 15 pound equivalent diameter monofilament is still, I think, going to hold up better. And in particular, if you fish rocks that have any kind of growth on them, stay away from braid. If your line has any chance of coming in contact with rocks, use monofilament. Braid will get stuck, you will get tangled, it will be a source of frustration for you. I have watched people go through this over and over again here in Southern California, where we have lots of barnacles and mussels and all this other stuff that grows on our rocks down here. Braid will get caught all over the place, and then you'll get a little weak spot in your line. And then when you hook into a big fish, that's where your line will break every time. It's where you hung it up on the rocks underneath a barnacle or under a limpet. So don't use braid if you're fishing really heavy structure that has benthic growth on it. Don't do it. If you're just getting into fishing, stay away from braid. Everybody will recommend you get braid. Just start off with some mono until you really learn your knots, until you really learn what you want to do. Then if braid makes sense for the applications you want to use it for, and I get it particularly in freshwater bass fishing, I get it for distance casting. There are certain places where braid is really has exceptional performance. But for the beginning angler, I really strongly just don't. Please, just don't. You're just asking for more heartache, and difficulty than you need. And lastly, fluoro. Use fluoro in situations where you need to get your bait deeper with a more natural presentation. Anyway, those are just my thoughts about the three major types of line. Hopefully you got something out of it. And whatever you do, go out, catch some fish, enjoy the fish you catch. Whenever you can, if it's legal, if it's practical, take a couple home for the frying pan, take what you need.